Okay, we are recording. Johnny, how are you, mate?
I'm good. We're just about to go on tour.
Mm.
So we start tomorrow in Leeds and then end in Wembley on Friday with DMAs, which is great. I mean, we did a little splattering of like shows last year, um, but it feels, yeah, it's just very exciting to be back in the group. It's
Yeah,
it's a wonderful thing. I'm extremely, not to get too American on it, but very, very grateful to be
yeah,
in this sort of situation again and be playing with those guys and also finished an album that we're so proud of. I honestly didn't think it would come around like that again. So it's just great. And even on the business side, having our managers back and great deal with Downtown and Mike Smith, who I massively have always been a fan of. Being involved is just wonderful. And yeah, it's life has changed dramatically in that interim. We're all dads, we've all got little kids, and it's just taken the edge off the ego and maybe the reasons we were doing it in the first place. But also just not having it as our main income source is quite
yeah.
interesting. That because it was that when we were on Island Records and doing it the first time around. And yeah, it's always going to be stressful as a business, being in a band. But it's like it's amazing thinking we don't have to do this or that necessarily. We don't have to go and play there or do things we might not want to do for brands or all those kind of stuff that we used to have to do for money because we make it elsewhere. So it's like it's become a different beast really. So
Did it
yeah, just
did it feel like that when because from my side of things,
yeah.
like I first stumbled across Tribes and yourself. I was running I don't know if you remember this. I was running a club night in Hoxton with the actor Matthew Holm,
Oh yeah, I remember that.
and we got sent a demo of Himalaya by
Yeah,
an agent, and it was like, fuck, this is incredible. And she was like, this is this new band, you should put them on. And then it felt like literally a few months after that, yous were like everywhere. It just exploded, like, cover of all the music mags and that. And you sort of touched on something about sort of branding deals, and this time it not being your main source of of paying the bills and stuff. So just to sort of go back there, did it feel that there was pressure also being on that major label, like this is shit or bust, we've got to do all these things, and did it feel
yeah,
like it could all end at any given point?
yeah, absolutely, and it did. I mean, and I think like there's a stigma with musicians about getting dropped. It doesn't exist in the fans with the fans. It just doesn't because why they don't care what label you're on, or very very few of them do. So yeah, we were always aware. We went to LA on our second album, and we went to Sound City, and often the opportunity that arose, and we spent an awful lot of money, and it was never really talked about. Like we were never in it for cash. We were pretty self-sufficient in terms of we could live on anything at the beginning. So yeah, it became more of a like, God, we've all got flats now, and yeah, we've got to do this, or we've got to go to Dubai and do a show for Rolling Stone magazine to 5 people for money. It's like it was all getting it was a little of there was tastes of that coming.
Yeah,
What you have to do to survive sort of financially. So you're always looking for that kind of like Coca-Cola show or whatever you can do for a private event that pays you a fortune. You just can't make on tour.
mm.
And I think a lot of bands went through that. That was kind of I don't even know if that stuff exists now, but yeah, when it becomes about money or when the money's running low, or certainly when you get dropped from a major and you're used to your tour support being paid and then it isn't. Yeah, it's a different feeling. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's just not that this time round, and it wasn't that to begin with. It was just sort of the tail end of the band became a
Yeah,
bit more. Um, I'm not sure if it was more. It was more of an awareness from the band about like how we survive.
yeah.
Remember this sort of chat about, oh God, the wages are running out and all this kind of thing. But really, my point is just that it's arrived at a different place now, and we're like hell bent on making it sustainable and providing it the best living we can for us.
Yeah.
But also just at the beginning, like now, setting it up in the right way, you know, like the merch being of quality, and like putting the releases at the right time of the year so we can like play the right festivals and stuff like that. But it feels very exciting again, and it feels very possible, which I'm surprised by. I'm not sure if there's less bands around now, or the culture's changed, so you're allowed to be a bit older when you sort of like come back. But I think because we established ourselves the first time round, and we have this kind of like quite fanatic core. You know, I remember when we came back and did our first show back at the Forum at Kentish Town. It's probably the best gig we've done. You know, it's like 2.3 thousand, and it was like a football match. It was like 10 years after we released that album. It was like, I cannot believe, I would have been happy, honestly, playing in the pub down the road. You
Yeah.
know, I couldn't believe that it still had that kind of energy to it. And we got off and we were like, we've got to do this. Like, there's just no way. And we've kind of seen that in smaller versions all around the country, like Manchester, Glasgow, Sheffield. Like, so we got to see it through. And when we got back in the studio, it was there, but tenfold, like with the creativity. It was just everybody's playing better because we've all been playing nonstop for years. And so it was just like the songs are feeling like powerhouse. You know, it's like I'm so excited for it to come out. And you never get that initial splash again. You know, I'm not somebody looking for that. Oh, it must be like that when We Were Children came out and stuff. It's everything. Every chapter in your life is ever so slightly different, and I don't think trying to recreate things is ever gonna doesn't work in any area of life really. So I'm kind of looking for something new, and we all are.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's just kind of just playing really good shows, or writing, or traveling the world in that way that you can't really do unless you're in the band, which is just, you have a purpose when you get to these places. It's not a holiday, you know, and I kind of miss that. So that I have these little goals that, you know, I want to go to Italy, and I'd love to go to Japan again, and but nothing grandiose, you know. It's just kind of very, very grateful to be in the group and hammer out some like really like our own style of rock and roll that we feel we are unique at, you know, whether it's like just got that slight wobble in it, or it's like, you know, it's real. We don't use backing tracks. It's organic band, and sometimes we're shit and sometimes we're really good. So I kind of like that kind of roll of the dice with the shows, you know.
Yeah. Let's start your playlist. Johnny, I'm going to ask you for your first track to tell me the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro, please.
So it's Sweet Jane off the Velvet Underground album Loaded, which I kind of like read up on last night before this, and it was a kind of last ditch attempt by Lou to have this kind of success that had been ever so evasive for them. It was just so strange. When you look back at the Velvet Underground, they're so influential. You know, the band that started 10,000 bands, as I've heard before, but it's like that song was always on in the kitchen, and like it really has gone into my psychic sort of brain so deeply that it's hard to even put it into words. Like everything I've ever written is pretty much sort of, I hold that as the great recording, like the sort of relationship between the acoustic and the drums in that is really interesting to me. And I love the way it sounds. I love the off the cuff nature of the vocal against quite a strict sort of regimented backing. I think even down to like We Were Children, I remember hearing like Mike Crossy like record that, and the relationship between the acoustic and the electric on the intro of that guitar really pings my ear, because I was like, that sounds like Sweet Jane. We should leave it like that, you know. And so that song is always with me, and it's given me this kind of like palette, whether I want it or not, that I pretty much base everything else on, you know. And it's funny because I've been playing it to my daughter recently, he's 4, and it really set her ear off as well. She's like, I really like this song, Dad. It's like, this is the great song, you know. Not sure I can tell her what it's about yet, but when she's old.
In regards to intros and and such. I want to ask you, obviously, when Tribes first appeared and you were signed to a major, there would have been pressure for singles and all of the stuff that comes with being in a major label band, and the way that probably in the time since you've been on hiatus or however you want to sort of call the break, the way that people listen to music's changed dramatically. There's people utilizing things like TikTok to get music out there, and obviously streaming, like Spotify is now a much bigger powerhouse than it was back then.
Yeah.
And that then, I'm sure that then creates things like the pressure to get on the right playlist to kind of get exposure to the right audiences. Any of these changes in the form, the way in which people get their music, has any of that filtered through and affected your creative process now?
It hasn't, but very aware of not letting it. Do you know what I mean? So we have spoken about like how, like I know relatively successful musicians who have taken it in and are looking at their intros and thinking about their song titles more for the TikTok thing. I'm naturally right.
Did you say titles as well, Johnny?
Yeah, titles.
Is that a big thing as well then?
Titles is a big thing. So in terms of search engine and like
wow,
moods and zeitgeist sayings and stuff like that that'll capture the attention of the masses. No, I don't think we do that. We just aim everything at live, like we always have. Like, how does this impact the room when it first kicks in? Is everyone going to go, that's my favorite song, that's the one I like, bang, 15 seconds, they've got it, and it's all about sort of elasticity, I'd say. Tribes, it's like we build something up and we drop down and we build it. Like our biggest song is the chorus is dropped out, it's like, and the same in Sapphire and We Were Children, we just go right down to the bass for it. So it's all about this like build and tension release, so the intro is a big part of that. But I don't I won't allow it in. I know that Dan won't either, it's like, it's kind of, we have these conversations about it, like we cannot go down that rabbit hole because you can't trust it. In a year it'll change, and 15 seconds is an abomination really for like consuming music. My attention span's been battered enough by like just zoning out on Netflix every night. It's like I don't need other things to worry about. I'm trying to, if anything, we're 3.5, 4 minute, we're kind of fighting with our radio pluggers enough over like edits and stuff, let alone like going down. But I know how powerful it is. I know what a draw it is, and I know how significant it is. But I think like in all of the music history, you're rolling the dice when you put anything out anyway. So nobody really knows. The majors don't know. Like, we've experienced all of that stuff. So I think taking a risk on an app is very, very dangerous thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me the first song you remember hearing, Johnny, that had an emotional impact on you, please.
It was Heartbreaker by Led Zeppelin. My dad's not a musician, but he's a huge music fan. And Heartbreaker really stopped me in my tracks about 6 or 7. I actually called my mum about this last time, and she was like, "You're just obsessed with the riff." And like, that was about the time I picked up a guitar. And I've always loved just how the sort of top end on Jimmy's guitar on that, and just how strange it is as a riff, the sort of like like the triple on the front is like, and I think as a kid I found it really, really exciting and just really wanted to understand where that music came from. It was a little later on DVD that I found a copy of Song Remains the Same, and I saw him play it live. But I'm not from a religious family. I'm not from a family that really holds anything that dear. But 70s, 80s, and 90s rock stars were the kings in our house. My dad held them on a pedestal that was like, these are seriously significant cultural figures and should be respected at all times. Very regularly he would make these huge proclamations that I wasn't allowed to like have Guns N' Roses or Aerosmith in the house because they weren't of the right caliber. Like, get that shit out of our house. And it would be like, I put Use Your Illusion 1 or 2 on, which I loved, but he just wouldn't have it. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, that's crap. You can't listen to that in here. Like this is like Zeppelin and Sabbath territory, you know. So it was a constant debate, and it was a debate that we had in depth all the time about like these who are the great rock stars. So I never had a chance to be anything but a musician.
Yeah. Where was home? Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Newcastle in Jesmond, and I lived there till I was 4. And then I moved to the Midlands, place called Bilton, and I lived there till I was 12. And then I moved to a place called Hill Morton, which is in a town called Rugby, till I was 17. And then I was in Camden.
Yeah.
So it's hard to define home. I feel like I'm from the Midlands because I have a lot of my friends that are there. But my significant moments were in Camden, 17 onwards, really. So if anybody ever says where you're from, I always say Camden because I feel like that's where I sort of came of age, and that's where it's what that place kind of, this why I'm still here, but it represents me more than the Midlands. But there was an extremely like raw heavy metal scene in the Midlands. Like everybody loved like heavy shit. There was no, I was complete, and I still think how strange this was. Like I was completely untouched by modern pop. Like I never listened to the radio. I never read the magazines or the paper. You know, it's like I've later had a kid with an ex pop star, Billy, and I was completely unaware of her when I was a kid, you know, and she was like, you know, had number ones and stuff. But like I said, I lived in a bubble that was probably had a time capsule on it of like 1978.
Yeah.
Just because all of my friends' dads were exactly like my dad, and we go to barbecues and we just listen to like Mott the Hoople, and the Stones and like Black Sabbath. And that would just be it. We just talk about those bands like they were current, you know.
Would you have changed it if you could?
No, fuck no. No, I love it. I feel like I lived in Wayne Campbell's town with, you know, Wayne's World. I feel like that was kind of our vibe because it was untouched by modern culture. My best friends, Woody and Charlie's passed now, but we would just bop around, the three of us, in my Mini, listening to like Teaching the Maytals or the Stones or T-Rex like it was fresh.
Yeah.
It's insane, but that's what it was. And when I got to Camden, everybody was the same.
Yeah.
So it was like I'd found my tribe immediately. You know, it's like, well, everyone's the same here. The only difference is everyone's writing their own songs too. But the influences are there. And the Libertines as well. Like when they came, I was enamored by the fact there was a band from my era who were really good. You know, it's like that was fucking exciting, and it was raw, and they weren't polished on record, which I was so fascinated by.
It felt ramshackle, didn't it? It really
felt, yeah, like they just walked in and done a take, but the songs were fantastic, and it was just blew my head off, you know. Like everybody else.
You spoke about moving about a bit as a youngster, and I imagine as somebody that didn't have to do that, I was always sort of terrified of the thought of like changing schools and things like that. Tell me a little bit how that was, and start by I think telling me the song that reminds you of your time at school, please.
Welcome to the Jungle is the song at school, because that one did get through to me. You know, Guns N' Roses felt like everything I wanted in the 70s, but on like Nitro. You know, it just felt like it was like a cartoon character big, and they would drink more, and it was faster and heavier, and the sound of the record was more intense, and it dwarfed everything like sonically. So I just remember hammering that all the time, and like that really, I have very good memories of my childhood, but really like facing the record player with my acoustic, which is never going to fucking work, and trying to work out the guitar parts and finding like, why are they so hard? But looking back, it's like probably because I was playing like a 40-pound acoustic, and it's like strings like wire hangers on it. You know, I never had a chance. So yeah, I remember that. Moving around, yeah, I was young when I sort of went to the Midlands. Newcastle is a place that I love, but I didn't really know anything about it until we started touring. You know, I was weirdly, I was the second to last baby born in a hospital in Jesmond, right? And I thought I was told that I was the last kid, but I met a guy in a pub called Tom, who I became friends with, who told me he was the last baby born in Jesmond, and
Yeah,
he
that's pretty fucking surreal, isn't it?
fucking mental, right? And I was like, right, okay. And then we like got our he got his mum on the phone or something, and he was a few minutes like younger than me, and it was him. We ended up taking like a drama class together. I was like, what the fuck? So anyway, that was my only relation to Newcastle, was the fact that I knew this other guy that was born in this hospital.
Yeah.
And I really loved the football team until about 1998, when they were 8 points clear and with Kevin Keegan, and they signed Festino Espria. And they think they lost the league, and I was so gutted I never watched football. That's totally true. It still happened. I wouldn't be able to name a single player these days. But yeah, I used to go back and go to St James's Park with my dad occasionally. But I don't have a really feel. I've always struggled with feeling knowing where I'm from.
Yeah.
I think I've really put deep roots in Camden because it feels like, because I'm trying to establish something that I maybe haven't got. I've got a very sort of middle of the road accent, and I have my family are from Wrexham in Wales, and it's spread out, so it's like I've always worried when that question comes in, it's hard for me to answer. So it's kind of, I've then walked into an adult life where I just move around all the time as well. So I've built my own kind of thing here. And like I always say, yeah, I'm from Camden. I wish I knew more about Newcastle. I wish I had more of a connection with it, but I just don't. It's something I say on stage, like I was born here, but it doesn't really, it doesn't really mean that much. And the Midlands was wonderful, but we were always coming down to London on the weekends, or going up to Birmingham or Coventry to see shows or whatever. But it had a sense of space that I've missed since. I think it had a sense of area around the Midlands, like between Northampton and Coventry, and you could just sort of go in any direction. It was very safe and free.
Sure.
Totally landlocked, not much going on, but you could just kind of build your own identity. And I still see that when I go back. Like you see these pockets of kids who just look totally different because they're not from major cities and they're not under any kind of like obligation to dress in a certain way. It's just you pick and choose your culture from the major towns. You take the bits you like and you chuck the rest, which allowed me to just be, live in a time capsule essentially. And
did you know what you wanted to be when you was at school?
I did immediately. Yeah, I had no qualms that I wanted to be a musician from about the age of 12.
Was that encouraged at school?
Not really. I mean, there was lots of other musicians, but not really. No, it wasn't. I think my mum and dad were totally open to me doing it and being open to that journey. They had no idea what it would hold, I don't think. So I got a good grade in English and I went to Goldsmiths. But really, as soon as I got here, I just took the loan and then just went hell for leather on being a musician, which took a long time because I was like trying to learn how to write songs and trying to it was so frantic then. It was like 2007. It was just fucking indie scene was like a beast. There was so many bands, and I kind of was out of Nambucca, that crowd. It was like 4 bands playing a night, and it was competitive, and there was A&R man everywhere. And then just as a punter, there was just so many club nights. Everybody was in the skinny jeans. It was parties just constantly. Everyone was a fucking DJ, or they had a band that even if they hadn't played, they were just in a band. It's like, it was just this overwhelming feeling. And it was really, really great for about 2 or 3 years. And I played with loads of people, and I didn't really find my singing voice for a while. And then it got to about 2009, and I was like, we'd broken up this group that I was in. One of the guys had gone off to everything. And me, Jimmy, and Dan were sat in a pub, and I was like, I'm just kind of sick of this like angular guitar approach. You know, like I fucking love Guns N' Roses and Aerosmith and Pavement. And I'd love the looseness of the Libertines, but I want it to be heavier. You know, it's like, and we just kind of arrived at this all together, and we were like, let's just do the band that we wanted to be in when we were kids. Like, let's just make the music that's really fucking simple, it's heavy and loud, and has this kind of vague message of like nostalgia back to this time, but also just positive shit. And let's just dress like we dress and just put clad in denim and leather and just fucking, you know, just have it a bit. And we did it, and it sort of immediately, it almost immediately clicks. You know, we were in a rehearsal, and we were like, we met Miguel in the pub in the Hawleys, an old school friend of Dan's. We auditioned him, we just tapped on the bar. You know, he looks like he's the most handsome man in North London. And he was really into the Chili Peppers. And we were like, yeah, we love the Chili Peppers too. Let's just have that in the sort of rhythm section as a flavor.
Yeah. And
we'll have a bit of Zeppelin and a bit of Velvet Underground, and we'll fucking do massive guitar solos, and we'll have wah wah pedals, and it'll be loose as fuck, and we'll just emulate all the stuff we like. And it's from the first rehearsal, it was like that. And it happened, you know, we slogged it for a couple of years, like everybody does. And there were moments where we were like very poor and like worrying like how we were going to continue. Then we got this bit of luck with the Mystery Jets, and they took us on the road. We lived in their van for 30 days and just absolutely like made a hole in their audience every night. And it just started happening. And then we went from pubs to like 1,000 cap Electric Ballroom like a week after the single came out, you know. So it was like just, and we just believed that that it was good, and we always have. And we never claimed to be the best band, but we're like, this is good, like this is making some impact, and people who like Tribe seems to have found their little club, you know. And yeah, it was more than anything, it was a reaction against that like 20 band bill indie, everybody on the sound like Pete Doherty. And trying to then it became a bit more angular, like with like the editors, and it was going in, or White Lies, it was going in the direction that I didn't really understand or recognize as like rock and roll, you know. It's like, is this rock and roll, or is this like new wave? I just don't understand it. Like, I know I can't play it, so I've got to get
what you love.
Yeah, it's like got to just go to, you know, get the Marshall stack out and like do your thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we've come back to again. You know, it's like there's a real element, there's a childlike element in the band. It's very regressive. You know, we talk about the shit we liked when we were kids, and we like Van Halen and you know, those kind of bands, and we reference them in the studio. You know, and it's not based on other people's sounds or anything more relevant. Which I love. I think that's really freeing artistically. Sometimes with the ballads, and there's a lot of them in our band, you can lean into the Smiths, or you can lean into like, maybe it'll have an element of an Arctic Monkeys flavor in there, you know. But it's that's a side, I think, to the sort of heavier stuff we do. And there's a lot of shades to us now, which is really exciting. The set lists are getting cool, which is great.
Johnny, tell me the first record you remember buying.
Okay, so it was Turtles theme tune. I absolutely fucking loved Turtles, and my mum made me a Turtles costume for Christmas once. She's really good at sewing.
I thought before you finished that sentence, my mum made me a turtle costume for Christmas. I thought, fucking hell, still like.
When I was 8.
Right, glad you clarified that.
Yeah, and it had the backpack on it and everything. And it was around that time that I went to a record store and bought the theme tune on 7-inch. And it's somewhere in my house. But yeah, that was, I was like born in 1985. So it was like, that was the time. I was the perfect age for, you know, the Turtles. And there's some, the theme tune seemed to have changed and they've rebranded, but that was a particularly good one. It was like 1992 or something like that.
Solid, absolute banger.
Banger.
You spoke about your dad's kind of love of music and a vast collection that you weren't allowed to add your GNR records to. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with the record shop, if there is one. And I know a lot of bands when they're on tour, they'll go and find the local sort of indie store and go and have a little sort of look through the record collection. And a lot of bands sort of play record store day shows and things like that. What's your relationship with the record shop?
When I grew up, there was a really good one in a place called Clock Towers in Rugby, and it was always, this is before, so maybe 1994 or 93, 94. And I was obsessed with blues as well. Like I loved Lightning Hopkins and just studied the blues on guitar and still do. And so they had a big like world music section. I don't even know you can call it that now, but like they had a massive section there. And I used to go in there and I discovered like Buena Vista and like all this kind of slightly off-brand blues stuff that had been like produced by Ry Cooder. And it was something I did on Saturdays if I had any money. And it was like, and I loved it. It was like, I always wanted more from the people in there. I think I still have that. Like I always want to go in and like have that high fidelity moment when you sort of chat to somebody and they're like, oh yeah, I completely agree. Here, check this out. And it's never happened to me. And it still pisses me off to this day. I'm still like overly forward with people in record shops, trying to recreate some scene in some fucking movie I probably haven't even seen. But I still go and I still spend too much in them and I still amass. I have a huge vinyl collection that I'm very proud of actually, because it's like everywhere we've gone, I've bought something and I've tried to have it physically as something to hand down to Lula or whoever, and just try and just learn about whatever it is I'm looking at. I think recently there's a label called Analog Africa who I'm obsessed with, and they do weird reproductions of like 70s Africa funk, Colombian rock and roll, and all this strange offshoot stuff that slipped through the net. And you buy these gatefold vinyls for way too much, and you open them up, and they've got like reproduced newspaper pullouts from the month that this album came out in fucking Peru or something, and you sort of pull it out and you read it, and then you got loads of info, and it's just like 4 or 5 hours of your life. It's usually like 2 or 3 discs, this thing, and it's just that is great. Like whenever I order one of those, I'm like, and I have way too many of them now, but it's just that's a great thing I like to do. And if I have any time, I like put it on behind me and just listen to it. And even if I get one idea from it, I always consider that not a waste of money,
Absolutely.
So I still try and support them, and we'll be doing 2 a day, I think, this summer, like in stores around the record. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Let's go clubbing, Johnny. Tell me the song that soundtracked your years clubbing.
So when I got to London, that's when it sort of really kicked off. There was a club night called Frog, I'm sure you know about, where I met everybody I still know. Pretty much. It's like Tom Frog was running that place with Jay and Danny. And that was the night, it was really early on, that I first heard, I'd heard Someday, but I first heard it in a club by The Strokes. And it was just sounded so fucking great when that extra guitar comes in wide, like the album, the straight sort of strumming one. It was like, oh my God, this is like, if I could make a track like this. And then watching everybody go off to music that I recognized as like rock and roll was extremely exciting to me. And I went every single Saturday and just got out of my mind for years and years until it closed. But I loved that, hearing that, and also watching friends of mine's bands, enviously watching them have their tracks played in the main room, and like watching people like move, bump up and down, and just being so excited by the fact that
what other bands were floating about that scene at that point, Johnny?
Fucking hell, it was like really early Kooks. The Holloways were quite a big deal. Like, it's kind of friends with them, and they had that great record Generator, which was moving clubs up and down the country. I mean, there were so many groups. For local, if I just say my friends, like Captain Black were like a kind of Mumford and Sons-esque group that were in Camden. They had a very sort of like riling like effect on the room. There was a band called the Michelles who kind of turned up in suits. We always played with them. There was Turbo Guys who were kind of doing like a more hardcore punk thing. Thrash Pussy, who were like the female version of that. And then every band that sort of made it through the net. So, you know, watching Razorlight kick off and like all these other groups that were, and the Wombats, and not so much the Arctic Monkeys because it was such a fast ascent. But every band went through Frog. So we kind of watched them en masse just ascend. You know, it's like Kid Harpoon before he was Harry Styles' songwriter was my favorite act. And he was like a kind of folk, very nuanced kind of folk act. And it was very powerful, like what he did. I never felt he captured it quite on record. And I think he'd probably agree, but it was like, it was just phenomenal, like club act. Gill Kicker, Sam McCarthy's band, absolutely brilliant. I mean, there's so many good songwriters that didn't quite break through.
Yeah.
Rosie Bones, who later went on to be Bones, like Rosie and the Odd Squad, were all the way through. We used to go to all those shows. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to sort of reel them off, but
yeah. To touch on the Strokes, like for a lot of young indie kids at that point, they'd probably not heard music like the Strokes before. When you heard it for the first time, did you instantly just reference so much? Obviously, you've chosen the Velvets as your opening track on this playlist. Could you hear the Velvets in it? Could you hear all of them records that you've been exposed to as a kid?
Yeah, I think it's impossible not to hear the Velvet if you know the New York references.
Yeah.
And it was just immediately, I think maybe if they hadn't have been from New York, because they were from Boston, it might have slipped me by that. It's just so regimented. And the Loaded in particular, like that Velvet Underground album was starting to get that because obviously it was loose before, but it's starting to get that really polished feel. And you're like, you know, when you hear Is This It, it's like that's got that, it's carrying that mechanism in the rhythm section, which is just tight. And so yeah, I heard it in New York City Cops being like the first double A side or whatever I think they did. It was like, that's that couldn't be more Lou Reed if it tried. Like that's guy is, and he's got a distortion on his voice. It sounds like a live Lou Reed.
Yeah.
You know. But I think like the angular nature and how strict he was, I've always wondered what the fuck it would have been like in a rehearsal, like because obviously the lead guitar player Nick, right, would have just can play his ass off. It's like, is he just being told to like keep it straight, not bend the notes, and just like really, really rigid? And Albert just doing downstrokes. You're like, how long could that be interesting to them, you know?
Yeah.
But it really works his sound. And I know that Julian was like very much on that, you know, and in control of them for those first two albums. So I think, yeah, what it spawned was what was the problem, you know. It spawned everybody doing that and everybody doing the downstrokes and everyone just having like lead lines that were just really melodic, but like very, very like angular, and there was no looseness. It had all gone. And I think by that point it had lost any influence from Lou Reed. Yeah. It had become the thousands of bands that they inspired to start, who most of which, you know, were lucky to get to a 7-inch single, really.
Yeah.
And just evaporated or changed names overnight. It created this like this swarm of bees like going for that sound.
Yeah.
And it was a very confusing time after that, because I loved the Strokes, and then what they created I didn't love. So it was like, it was almost, I rarely ever talk about them now because of fear of being pigeonholed with one of those bands that
yeah.
Find it hard to talk about the Libertines, even though I really love them. And I later actually played on one of Carl's albums, which I found like was a real honor for me, you know. But it was like, it's hard to mention them now because of how much influence they've had. I think that's just what it is, you know. In 20 years, they'll be hailed as like the great thing that they were. But yeah, I think Sunday by the Strokes was that the kind of catalyst moment. Was like, God, this rock and roll bands are like moving clubs in a way that maybe Oasis couldn't, or maybe that was more of like a stadium feel and you wouldn't necessarily put it on obviously some of their tracks, but that had passed and now we had our own thing. And it was like, yeah, I'm like 21 and I've got my own bands and they're like roughly the same age. So it's super exciting. Yeah.
I'm going to take you home now for track 6, and I'm going to ask you to tell me a favorite song from an artist from your home county, please.
I'm going to say Rain Song by Led Zeppelin. Robert Plant's from Wolverhampton, and I spent a lot of time there as a kid. And even though this intro, is written by Led Zeppelin, it feels very much a Robert song just due to the lyric on it. I remember watching the Song Remains the Same DVD, and he's walking around with the fucking sword on the horse, and the horse like falls in the ditch at one moment. He kind of looks at the camera, is like, God, this is really terrible, like these dream sequences, but just brilliant. But yeah, I love that song, and it's in a weird tuning, and I spent a long time in my teens learning that, and I haven't really gone back to it since. But last night, writing you this list, I like had a go at it again, and it's just a bit of music that reminds me of my shitty mini when I was a kid and like being a teenager, and having this like awe of Jimmy Page's like guitar playing and not quite understanding it and not quite being able to do it, but just like being completely mesmerized by it. It still stops with my tracks if I'm out, and you very rarely hear it, but it's actually on a plane about 6 months ago, and I heard somebody listening to it, and again, like, go to, yo, do you like Led Zeppelin? Like,
okay, right. This is your last track, Johnny. I'm going to ask you to tell me a song that you think many people may not know that you would like them to hear.
I love Bobby Womack's version of Fly Me to the Moon. The only reason I picked this is because I stumbled across it quite late last year, and I just haven't been able to turn it off. It's so moving, and it's very strange how the music, with the addition of the sort of minor chords he's put around it, changes its meaning almost. It's like with the Frank Sinatra version, it's like Fly Me to the Moon feels celebratory and feels like you're headed to a positive destination, and Womack's version feels like you're running away or you're trying to get out of there, So it's just that little flip of the chord, and it's got this sort of whole new meaning. And I tend to obsess over when I find something like that. I drill it for months until I understand what's happened in the song. It's like I'm not a technical musician. I'm purely emotional, really, and I react to things. I play something with my hands and be like, I like that. I don't know why or what the version of the chords are that I should be doing, or how I stumbled across this, but I like it. And I think like with this, I'm still trying to like capture that, because 3 chords into the song, it just drops to this minor and it sort of rips your heart out. And it's like I'm trying to find that now and put it in a song myself. Yeah. So I will listen to this like in a really autistic fashion many times a week. Yeah. It happens, and that's how I sort of approach songs I like. I'm really glad I found it, because it'd been a couple of years since I'd had that reaction to music, and I was kind of missing it. It used to happen all the time to me, and it happens much less these days. I think being a dad, you're tired a lot of the time, and you're not in control of the stereo anymore. The album I listen to the most is fucking Frozen 1. I probably hear that twice a day on the school run.
It's all good. Bear with, mate. Bear with it, because I had years and years and years of that, and I've had 2 moments. Like my children are 20 and 18 now. My 20-year-old come up to me once and went, "Have you ever heard Summer in My Heart by Aztec Camera?" And I thought, yes, I have. And it's a fantastic record. And I was made up by that. And then about a month and a half ago, my youngest walked into the kitchen wearing a Meat is Murder t-shirt. And I thought, my fucking work is done. I've cracked it. She's got a Smiths t-shirt on. Fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to those moments. I think they'll come. It's just the repetition of Dad put my song on and like the same records, the repetition. But I'm doing the same thing, but I'm just doing it on headphones.
Yeah.
It's Bill the other day. It's like I am listening to my songs as much, or the songs I like as much as she is listening to Frozen. I'm just doing it privately. So who's the madder person? It's like
wonderful, Johnny. What we do is we put together a little playlist on Spotify for all of your song picks, and obviously we'll put some of your music on there, and obviously the new Tribe stuff. Looking forward for the rest of 2023. What's going to be happening?
It's busy. So we've got the album's out August 18th. So we'll be touring all around the country in support of that. there's some pretty big announcements next week for some headline shows, bigger than we've done before, which is really exciting. There's some good news coming from Italy, so we'll be going over there, and we'll be hitting some support tours and just probably been on the road maybe 18 months in support of this one. So it's going to be, we're just, couldn't be happier really. I can't wait to do it.
Oh, wonderful. And if people want to keep up to speed,
very healthy for it.
Love it.
Yeah.
If people want to keep up to speed with what's happening,
Instagram.
Where's the best place? Instagram, yeah.
The tribe's Facebook page or the Instagram is where to get all the news. Yeah.
Wonderful, Johnny. What we do is we'll tag you in if it's all right with you. We've trapped. We'll take Tribes in it, and for people that aren't already following it, then it's one click away. Mate, it's been really, really lovely getting to catch up with you and
it's been great,
records. I really appreciate your time today, mate, and best of luck with the record and the tour. And I will endeavour to get to one of the live shows on that tour.
Thank you, Stu.
I'm going to press stop, Johnny. Don't go anywhere.